Hello and welcome back. This is video number 3, and we're going to talk about reasons why your site is slow. Now, to understand how to speed your site up, you really need to understand first and foremost what is slowing it down. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of different variables, but our goal here is the 20/80 rule, meaning we're going to find the most common variables, focus on them, that will give you the large amount of impact. So a little bit tweaks here and there, which will give you the biggest impact. And that is our goal here. And instead of trying to teach you hundreds of different variables, which would be time consuming and very overwhelming. So what I advise you to do is implement each one of these one by one. Each one of these can take a good amount of time, some of them less, some of them more, but some of these will make a huge impact on how fast your site loads. And they are, number one, your WordPress site has just way too many things in it. It's bloated with too much code, with too much plugins, with too much pages, posts, images, everything. It just has way too much in it. If you think about even your computer, if you add too many things onto your PC or your Mac computer, as an analogy here, then your computer will become slower and slower and slower, right? So same concept here as well. Your WordPress site just has too many things. Your web hosting is just too slow. That's another big reason we found over the years. We've taken sites from one host and put it on another host, and it was faster. So sometimes the plan that you're under can actually impact how slow and how fast your site loads. Now, bear in mind that the reality is that WordPress sites, in general, after they have become bloated, they use a lot of CPU and server resources. Now, I want to be clear here to say that when you install WordPress by default with nothing on it, it usually runs very fast. It's usually because things are added to it like plugins, like images, like other code that tends to slow it down. And another issue is that the majority of websites are hosted on shared hosting. And we'll talk more about that in that particular video, but because it is on shared hosting, you're essentially sharing a server with 100 or more other people, and of course they will impact your site. So it's not necessarily that you're doing anything wrong. If you have other people on that server that are rocking the boat or doing something, crashing the server, then you're affected as well. And that simply means that your whole website will become slow because with shared hosting, you are sharing the server with hundreds of other people. And either you're sharing a house essentially with hundreds of other people. And we'll discuss this later on. Number 3, your images are way too big. One thing that a lot of us forget about is that different people have different internet speeds. Some are on slower speeds, some are on faster speeds. And just because you have a faster speed doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else has a faster speed. So even if it loads fast with you, it may not run fast with other people. So that's just something to bear in mind. Your images are way too big and they need to be squeezed down. Now, this has always been a problem even decades ago. And according to Google, images often take about 60% of total page weight. In other words, they take up too much room and you need to size them down. And this means that most websites are being slowed down because they have way too many images that are just taking too long to load. So we'll discuss how to optimize all of your images at once or one by one and how to speed that process up. In fact, I remember back decades ago, when you optimize your images, a lot of times you would have to do it with Photoshop. And you would have to do it one by one, which really can become a pain. But nowadays, there are plugins out there and there are platforms out there and software applications that will help you essentially speed up and optimize all of your images all at once without ever having to get Photoshop. The next one is hot linking. This means somebody else is linking to your site, your images, your videos, essentially. And what they're doing is they're sending traffic to those images and videos, be getting people that don't even know that it's your images, and they're just stealing your images. And if that's the case, they're essentially using your bandwidth and your server resources. The next thing is caching. Caching is essentially what your internet browser does when you visit sites on a regular basis, and then your browser usually saves tons and tons of images and other files, HTML files and CSS and other files, so that when you go back to that website at a later date, it's already sitting on your computer and therefore it loads super fast. So you can do the same thing with WordPress, but you need to tell it to do it a certain way. And of course, we'll be discussing this in relation to your WordPress site and all of that. The next thing is content delivery networks. And usually what happens here is when you host a website, let's say, for example, that the web hosting server that you put your website on is in the United States. What that means is that if somebody is on the other side of the world, let's say, for example, the United Kingdom or Australia or Canada or even the Philippines or Russia or anywhere else, and they come to your website, essentially what their computer has to do is it has to travel all the way through the internet, all the way to the USA server just to view your website. So as you can imagine, that will literally slow things down to a halt. So even if it runs super, super fast on your side, they have to go all the way over there or vice versa, and it's really going to slow things down, especially if your customer base is all over the world. If that's the case, this is a definite must, and you'll see why in just a minute. So CDNs are basically web hosting data centers that are positioned all over the world. So all the places that I mentioned just now, let's say, for example, that you're using a CDN, and those servers are placed strategically all over the world, close to those people. So when somebody goes to your website, instead of having to travel all the way back to USA, they essentially are going to go to that location that is nearest to them. So that's what a CDN is all about, and those can be very, very powerful. We'll talk about the different types of CDNs out there as we've tested numerous ones. And with that said, we'll move on to video number 4.